Welcome to the regular board meeting of the Pasco School Board of Directors. And I'll call the meeting to order. It looks like first order of business is flag salute by McGee Elementary students with Principal Mrs. Leckel-Polster, Mrs. LP.
Well, thank you on behalf of my students. They're awesome. School Board President Christensen, board members, and Superintendent Whitney, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the students that have been selected to represent James McGee Elementary this evening. Esteban Zarate, Adriana Mendoza, Jordan Marquez, Randy Alcalde, and Lucia Robledo are members of our Student Leadership Council. And they, with their amazing advisor, Mrs. Marquez, are here to represent our student leadership students at McGee. We currently have 55 4th, 5th, and 6th graders who are involved in student leadership. Our student leaders, with the guidance of Mrs. Marquez, have been instrumental in providing a real student voice in our school, as well as providing service to others. Our student leadership students assist with activities such as our recent VIP Day, Donuts with Dads, and Mustang Market, which is part of our school-wide positive behavior program. Last year, these guys began a wonderful tradition of organizing the purchase and planting of a new tree each year on our playground. What I've described is just the tip of the iceberg of what these students and their fellow leadership students do for our school community. We're very fortunate to have these students at our school and in our district. So with that, I would like to ask you all to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So thank you, Mrs. LP and Ms. Marquez. We appreciate you coming and appreciate your students coming. We have a little token of appreciation we want to share with you. I will just tell you that 4 of my 5 children went to McGee Elementary School. So it's we live close by there, and it's been our school. So.
And I had the privilege of having Mrs. LP as a principal for several of my children, and my most rambunctious child. And needless to say, she was in his office a couple of times, and I appreciated her and the way she handled him, realizing he was a good kid that was making some not so good choices as young pre-adolescent boys do. So I do appreciate you and the work that you do for our district and these kids. It was fun to get to know you a little bit and continue with your great work in leadership.
So you have parents here or family here with you tonight, correct? You want to point them out and tell us who they are?
Yeah, can we have the parents just stand up really quickly? Thank you so much for your support of our kids.
That is key to a good education, a good principal, good teachers, and parent support. So just I'll point out to you, we have these 3 young ladies that came and gave you that recognition. These are our student board members. These are student leaders in our high schools. And we would just encourage you to continue on that leadership path and consider when you get this age, when you're a junior or senior in high school, to consider running for this seat on the board, okay? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
McGee Mustangs.
All right, thank you.
All Ms. Richardson, could we get a roll call?
Steve Christensen,
Present.
Josh Marketson,
Present.
Present. Kristen Craig,
Present.
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 Thank you. So next on the agenda, we have to administer the oath of office. So there was an election recently, and 3 of us were re-elected. But I guess the rules are that we have to take the oath of office each time we're elected, so we'll do that now.
All right. I, Steve Christensen,
I, Steve Christensen,
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of Washington,
and the Constitution of Washington,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of
and will faithfully discharge the duties of
Director of Pasco School District Number 1,
Director of Pasco School District Number 1,
Franklin County,
Franklin County,
State of Washington,
State of Washington,
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability. Thank you, Michelle.
Go. Done, great, good job. Sherry Lincoln. All right. I, Sherry Lincoln.
I, Sherry Lincoln,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Washington,
and the Constitution of the State of Washington.
and I will faithfully discharge the duties of
I will faithfully discharge the duties of
Director of Pasco School District Number 1,
Director of Pasco School District Number 1,
Franklin County,
Franklin County,
State of Washington,
State of Washington,
to the best of my ability.
best of my ability.
Okay. Okay. I, Amy Phillips,
I, Amy Phillips,
do hereby solemnly swear or affirm
do hereby solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Washington,
and the Constitution of the State of Washington,
and I will faithfully discharge the duties of
and I will faithfully discharge the duties of
Director of Pasco School District Number 1,
Director of Pasco School District Number 1,
Franklin County,
Franklin County,
State of Washington,
State of Washington,
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my abilities. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Whitney. Next, we've got special recognition by Mr. Shane Ettinger.
Good evening, Board President Christensen, Superintendent Whitney, and members of the board. Tonight, we'd like to recognize and honor the service of Board Member Scott Lehrman, who just recently ended his tenure as School Board President. Scott was appointed to the Pasco School Board in October of 2013 to fill Ruben Peralta's seat on the Board of Directors and to serve out the rest of his term. Pasco voters elected Scott to serve a new 4-year term in November of 2015. Later that month, Scott was selected to serve as School Board President by his fellow board members. He has served honorably in that role for the last 2 years. During Scott's tenure as Board President, the Pasco School Board has been honored twice as a Board of Distinction by the Washington State School Directors Association. And in 2016, Pasco's Board of Directors was named School Board of the Year by WASDA. That award was based on the board's success in being accountable and open to the public while seeking divergent perspectives in its decision-making, adopting a collaboratively developed district plan focused on learning and achievement, and employing and supporting highly qualified teachers, administrators, and other staff members while also providing for professional development. During Scott's tenure, Pasco's school board also identified measurable outcomes for the district's strategic improvement plan and then approved results policies to guide the district toward reaching those goals. We like to call these our outrageous outcomes, that 100% of third graders read on grade level in their language of instruction, 100% of students pass algebra by the end of 9th grade, 100% of students are engaged in extracurricular activities, 100% of 9th graders end the school year on track for graduation, and 100% of students graduate with a career path. On behalf of the Pasco School District, we just want to say thank you, Scott, for your commitment and dedication to our students, families, and employees. Now, if you please come forward, we have a small token of appreciation that Superintendent Whitley would like to present to you, and of course, we've got to take a picture.
You got to turn it around so, yes. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mr. Ettinger. And thank you, Michelle.
Yes.
Mr. President, can I say a few words?
Please do.
So first, I wanted to thank my family for the time commitment, allowing me to volunteer my time here with the Pasco School Board and the Pasco School District, and they're here in attendance tonight. So can you guys stand up real briefly? They're in the back there. My two oldest, Ellen and Landon, attend Mark Twain. I see some Mark Twain staff members here. And also my third my third student, Lily, there is in kindergarten. And we also have a future Pasco student who is a year and a half old. So again, thank you to all of you for the sacrifices and allowing me to serve. And then I want to thank my fellow board members for allowing me to serve, and Ms. Whitney for the collaboration, and Ms. Phillips for serving as vice president. And I know that we did some great things the last couple of years, and thank you to Mr. Christensen and President Christensen and Vice President Phillips for volunteering to lead us this next year. I know we'll continue to do great things, and thank you for what you guys are doing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lehrman. Appreciate your time and service there. All right, so looks like we're at approval of the minutes. We have a motion.
Mr. President, I move to approve the regular meeting minutes of December 12th, 2017.
We have an approval and a second for the regular meeting minutes of December 12, 2017. Those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Any opposed? Say no. All right, thank you. So the minutes are approved. Agenda review, item 7. I don't think so. So that's an interesting question. No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
All right. So I did want to, there aren't any addition or changes other than we would ask the board's approval to hear the ESS accountability report first. Dr. Dennis McGuire is here to provide that report, so we would like to change the order of the reports. You will see on the agenda there was a notation specific to the request for an executive session. Should the board need it, we can request it. Should the board not need it, I will rescind.
So I don't think we'll need the executive session. I probably should have said this earlier. So we had a study session at 4:30 where we talked about director districts, potentially having director districts in our school directors rather than just all at large. And you can see that study session on YouTube if you're interested in that discussion. And then following that, we did have an executive session with to talk about Superintendent Whitney's evaluation, which is due the end of this month. We did have potentially a continuation of that scheduled for after this meeting, but I think if I could get a nod of the head or a shake of the head, I think we're good, that we don't need a following executive session. So, okay, good. Then we do not need an executive session following this meeting.
So we will not be requesting an executive session.
All right, thank you. So with that, we will open it up for audience comments. We would ask you to please limit your time to 2 minutes. We're not going to time you necessarily, or I guess we do have some folders there. So, yeah, please limit it to 2 minutes. We're not gonna necessarily cut you off, but we would like you to be respectful of that request, and then we'll go from there. So at this time, if you want to address the board, have any comments for the board, you're welcome to approach the microphone and have your 2 minutes. So.
Ms. Whitney, school board. My name is Melissa Reed. We've met before. I'd like to introduce my family. This is Parker. This is James. And this is my husband, Doug. Parker is a student at the brand new, soon-to-be-named Pasco Early Learning Center. And James is a 4th grader at Rosalind Franklin STEM Elementary School. You all received an email from me today, but just to review, I'd like to read that. Ms. Whitney, thank you for reaching out. This is because she emailed me a few days ago. I waited to get back to you until after Parker's first day at the ELC because I wanted to give you an accurate answer about the progress or lack thereof. Allow me to give a narrative of how our family's day went. This was yesterday. The postcard I received from transportation over winter break stated that Parker would be picked up at 12:22. At 12:35, the bus had not arrived. I called the transportation department, and they said the bus was scheduled to arrive at 12:41. When the bus pulled up, I observed that it did not have a wheelchair lift. The bus driver stated that she did not know Parker had a wheelchair. I asked if she had a car seat or his medical plan on the bus, and she did not. I drove Parker to school myself. Upon arrival at the ELC, I assisted in taking Parker to his classroom. I observed a gorgeous classroom. Miss Nicole Johnson did a wonderful job preparing her room for her students. I returned to the ELC before dismissal to be sure Parker had appropriate transportation home. I planned to wait in the parking lot, but went inside the building to use the restroom at 3:10. I was let into the building and not greeted or required to sign in. I have great concern about that. The receptionist was at what appears to be a temporary desk away from the main reception area with her back turned toward the rest of the building. I observed many other, I assume, parents allowed into the building without question, not made to sign in, and left to wander the halls looking for their student's classroom. Upon dismissal, I walked out with Parker and his class to the bus area. I wanted to be sure that his bus situation was appropriate. When we got outside, his bus was not there. 45 or 42. Did you know that there is an actual 45 and an actual 42 and a labeled 45 and a labeled 42? It's very confusing to know which bus my son is actually supposed to be on. Several students were left waiting without a bus. When I asked, I'll leave this name blank, what Parker's actual bus number was, he was very curt with me and didn't have a real answer to my question. After 25 minutes of waiting outside in 30-degree weather for bus 42, or was it 46? I don't really know. I decided to take Parker home myself. I feel terrible for the other students whose parents didn't have the luxury to be there to take their kids home. To Mrs. Dawkins' credit, she was on the radio trying to find that bus the entire time. She was given many false promises that it was on its way. I don't actually know if bus 42 or 46 arrived yesterday afternoon. Thankfully, My other son, who is a fourth grader at Rosalind Franklin, was participating in Destination Imagination after school until 5:30. Otherwise, he would have come home to an empty house because Parker and I returned well after the time James gets off the bus. Some added concerns from my afternoon at the ELC. The women's restroom did not have a garbage can for my used paper towel. The nurse's office doesn't have paper towels or soap. The nurse's bathroom looks like a storage room and isn't in working order. The area where students and staff are supposed to wait in case of a fire is not ready or safe. It's a dirt pile. The reception area is a mess. It was left dark and unstaffed with the lights turned off. It's very unprofessional. The security of the building is a huge concern for me. The fact that anybody is let in and allowed to freely roam the building without record must be in violation of some district policy. But regardless of policy, it concerns me because my baby is in that building 4 days a week. I was disappointed to find that on opening day, the building was void of district admin other than Christy Dawkin. Ms. Whitney, if what happened yesterday was a simple case of unfortunate events, I would not be so upset. Actually, upset is a mild word to describe how my husband and I feel right now. We are furious, disappointed, and left feeling like once again Pasco School District treats children with different abilities as second-class citizens. The simple fact that an appropriate bus was not routed is indication of this. Parker Reed uses a wheelchair. We've had issues with this in the past. How do the powers that be not know this by now? Where is the ball that continues to be dropped? Is it one ball or many? Things need to change in this district fast. Now, a couple of you replied to my email, and I appreciate it, and you asked for an update. So I would like to give you an update of how today went. Parker was picked up by an appropriate bus, and I followed the bus in because of his situation. If they need to stop and call 911, I would like to have an idea of where that bus is. So I followed the bus in. By the time we got to the school, it was 1:13. Classes begin at 1 o'clock. I returned to the school after school to meet the other driver who was supposed to bring Parker home. That bus was appropriately outfitted. However, when I talked with the bus driver, I asked him if he knew what a grand mal seizure was. And he said no. And that is life-threatening for my son. So I made the choice to drive Parker home again. Now, back to pickup time. Parker's bus 42 was parked along the curb but could not get into the yard because so many buses are in such a small area picking students up. It was, dismissal is at 3:40. It was 4 o'clock before Parker's bus was able to get into the yard to get him on board. His time that transportation has given me for drop-off is 4 o'clock. Had I been at home, I would have been panicking. And as it was, I was panicking because this boy gets home at 4 o'clock. And I was downtown and I needed to be off of Road 90.
All right, so it appears we have some issues that I'm
So
confident are being
more
addressed.
of my family would like to speak.
Pardon me?
More people would like to speak.
So we have a policy of 2 minutes, and we would appreciate your concern, appreciate you bringing it to us. So who wants to speak?
We have three
Mr.
more
Reed,
we have
do you want to
two-
speak, or?
You say your
Okay,
name.
Sure.
Hello, I'm James, the student from Rosalind Franklin. Today at my school we had an assembly and we learned about Martin Luther King Jr. He fought for civil rights and he was killed because he did so. And today we're still having to fight for civil rights for people like my brother.
Thank you for your input, young man. Mr. Reed?
I don't know how to follow that, but, and I just want to echo my wife's concerns and just our disappointment with the coordination and lack of communication for Parker. This has been like a 3-year journey and battle for his needs and a lack of providing for those. So I would just hope that in the future we can get some of these issues resolved, and other students who aren't as fortunate, who are going through the same issues, will have resolution as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate, I think I can speak for the rest of the board, you bringing this to our attention. I mean, obviously, we have some issues that we need to address there. I'm confident we will get them worked out.
Right. We did send, I got your email this afternoon and responded. We did send a team over, 2 of which are in the back of the room. I think it would be really helpful to me if you guys could coordinate so that I know exactly where we are in problem solving. And we actually have a plan to kind of continue to tackle this tomorrow morning. So Tracy and Eric Bowles are standing back there. If you guys could kind of huddle around where are we now so that I know exactly what we need to tackle moving forward. We'll get involved. We'll get this all squared away for you. We all deeply care about you and your family, and we're committed to making sure that this is all squared away.
Is it James, your son? Is that, all right. Well, thank you, James and Parker and Mr. and Mrs. Reed for coming and bringing this to our attention. So, thank you very much. So we're still in audience comments. If there's anybody else that has anything else that they would like to bring before the board. Second call for audience comments. Final call. Seeing nobody else wants to address the board, we'll move on now to communications. So, Mr. Lehrman, if you would like to start.
So I had a good holiday with my family and friends, and it feels like it's been a long time since we've seen each other. I guess I think we did this since the last meeting. I attempted to take my kids to the Miracle on 34th play, but we hadn't gotten advance tickets, and it was pretty sold out with ones and twos seats left over. So thank you to the department, and thank you to those kids for providing that entertainment for the community. It looks like it was well attended. Fortunately, Richland and Chiawana were playing a basketball game that evening, so we had a change of plans, and the kids and I went and watched part of that game. It wasn't very close. I think we made it till halftime. But also congratulations to all the winter sports athletes and coaches for all the hard work that they're putting in. I was able to go take a tour last week of Delta High School, so thank you to Dr. Rodriguez and the teachers and staff there for giving me a tour. Hadn't been there in about a year, and to see all the great things that those students and that staff is doing over at Delta.
I did get to attend a couple of Christmas programs since our last meeting, and it's just an eye-awakening. I mean, I know it, but it's still that how crowded our schools are is because they have to have 2 programs because they don't have enough room for everybody to come to one program. So they have to have 2 programs to get so that all the parents and attendees can attend the program. So they have to have 2 programs for the different students. So, but it was a great time. I'm glad the holidays are over and we're on to a new year and great things coming for the new year. Thank you.
Thanks. So I've been moved. I think I've actually been demoted because I didn't handle the lights appropriately for the presentation, but I'm not happy with that, and I was requested to be moved back, and that was rejected earlier, so this is where I am, but I'm the same person that used to be on the end. Tomorrow night, there's a talent show of sorts, and Kristana may have maybe had the plan to talk about this, at Chiawana, the Student Mall, at 7 p.m. with staff and students. They call it the Cocoa Cafe. You get free cocoa as part of your, well, it's part of your admission, some cocoa. And so I'll be attending that, and I'm excited for that. This year, I'm planning on visiting schools, a community event of sorts at all of the schools in the district. And my intention is that I'll be able to mingle more with students and parents and staff at these events. Throughout the year though, if you would like to meet in person before or after one of these events, and I'll try to share that ahead of time at the board meetings, then just send me an email and we'll try to set up so we can meet in person if you have ideas or concerns or feedback you want to give to a school board member and that works for you at your school or at one of these other schools that I'll be at. Lastly, I just wanted to mention more from a public health standpoint, we're seeing heavy influenza activity throughout our community. This is very concerning. It seems like a fairly severe form of influenza. If your children or if you're a staff member, if you are sick, please do not go to school. Many of our families have numerous young children, as you just saw, many with babies at home, or if families have elderly grandparents live in their home, and that puts them in great danger if your child comes to school ill. So please, if your child is ill, do not send them to school. And you can still get the flu vaccine if you'd like. The percentages given related to the flu vaccine are kind of misleading. Like it's been reported, this flu vaccine this year is only about 10% effective based on what's circulating, and that's misleading because if you get the flu vaccine, even if you were to contract influenza, your illness would be much less severe and you'd be much less likely to have a serious case or life-threatening case. So it's always a good thing to do from a public health standpoint. So keep that in mind. Thank you.
I'd like to thank my mom for coming today. Stand up. Yeah, she just came back from Mexico and she was out of the country, so it's nice to have her come. She's actually the one who talked to me about the student board meeting and got me to put in for it. So she's kind of the whole reason that I'm here.
Thanks, Mom.
And piggybacking off Scott Lehrman, he was at my school and he was in my biotechnology and ethics class. So it's cool to see you there and get to say hi. And we're also planning for a blood drive at my school on February 1st. So that's kind of a ways away, but we're undergoing everything and getting people signed up and setting up posters and making sure that it's going to be squared away. So that's kind of what's going on.
Good afternoon. I had a good break. It's been a while now since the last meeting. And at our school, ever since we got back from break, one of the biggest things right now is finals, which is next week.
Hello, everybody. So for these past couple of weeks, hasn't been too much going on. It's been good, and I cannot complain. I had a great break, great Christmas and New Year's. Fun fact, my grandmother turned 95 on New Year's, which was a good accomplishment for her, a great accomplishment. And besides that, that was the best Christmas present that I could have got. So tomorrow, excuse me, like Mr. Richardson said, we have the Cocoa Cafe, starts at 7 p.m. and it'll be $7 at the door. So be there or be square, it'll be good. And then tomorrow we have our student council meeting, and for one of the goals we had set at our last student council meeting was student initiatives. And so far at my school, what I've seen from our Chiawana student reps, something there that they've been accomplishing their student initiatives. They've been working towards it, and it's been very good for them. But besides that, it's been very good and had a good time. Hope you guys did too.
Well, I hope your holidays were wonderful. Mine were. It's always good to be with family, and anyway, I also love the programs that come around at Christmas, and it was fun to see all of the press that we got on coat drives and food drives that all happened in this district. There's some really great things going on here. So appreciate the efforts of the principals and the parent organizations that helped with those, and teachers, I'm sure. So I really appreciate that. I got to go to the the fall sports assembly for, it's just with kids. Oh my goodness, it's amazing to see all of those kids in one gym. The parents aren't even allowed, well, they are not technically invited because there's no room at those things. So if they invite parents, it has to be with only part of the people there. But it was so fun watching the teachers play basketball against the students. And apparently, it was the first time in 10 years that the students actually won that basketball game. So that was pretty exciting. The students were pretty pumped about that. And I think there were a few embarrassed teachers, but they were really good sports. And then I also got to go to the Pasco High School Chihuahua game, and I was impressed with the sportsmanship displayed there, and the principals and the camaraderie they had with one another, and the way that game played out. It was a fun game to watch, and fun to watch all of our kids do well. And even though I was a little partial toward Chihuahua because my son's on the team, but I'll be more objective next year. And then a couple of I was able to attend a couple of programs, and those are really, really well done. There's so much work that teachers put in to these Christmas programs, and you can tell a great deal of work out of the school day. One play, the wife of a teacher had made all the costumes for the play. And that's impressive, the dedication in this district and the work that so many put into it. And I appreciate all of that.
So welcome back after the Christmas break. We're ready for the next, what is it, 3 months till spring break? So another big push, big time of hopefully lots of success. So over the break, a couple of things. I went to a wrestling match where Pasco High wrestled Richland, and that was a very quick match. I think every match was a pin or a forfeit. Unfortunately, Pasco came out way on top. There was one win on Richland's side. So. And then went to the Best of the West tournament, volunteered there to help with the clock there. Also, I live up in near McGee, where they have the Luminaria every year, and want to give a shout out to the bus drivers who were there with the Fill the Bus. Is it Fill the Bus? I think that's what they call it, collecting food. So took some food down to them, and then finally yesterday, I had the opportunity to go speak on Spanish radio. Fuimos la señora Reyes y yo y la señora Gracie. Fuimos a 92.5 La Super to talk about, we went to the radio station to talk about the board of directors, what the board of directors does, and then also Susana Reyes, our assistant superintendent, talked a little bit about her role, but want to give a shout out to 92.5 La Super for hosting us there. They do that, I believe it's the first, it's twice a month, it's first and third Mondays. We just happened to do it yesterday. I'm not sure why this month is off. I think it's second and fourth. Okay. But normally you can hear them on the first and third Mondays on 92.5 La Super. It reminds me of my days in Venezuela. We Radio Punto Fijo. It was a lot of fun. Anyway, thank you to them. And Lalo was a gracious host. It was a lot of fun and great opportunity. So, and with that.
And my understanding, there was a phone call made during your radio.
Yeah. So yesterday was my dad's birthday. He's not quite 95. He's 79, and he speaks Spanish as well. He spent several years in Uruguay, Argentina, and most recently in Guatemala. And so I told Lalo that he speaks Spanish, so Lalo gave him a call, wished him happy birthday. So it was a lot of fun. But yeah, it was a great opportunity, and I appreciate our community sponsors who help us out in getting the word out to our families. So thank you. All right. So with that, we will move on to Agenda item number 10, reports and discussion. And we will begin with item C, ESSA accountability. So Ms. Whitney, do you want to introduce that?
So it is really, truly my great honor to introduce Dr. Dennis McGuire, who actually supervised me in my very first leadership role as a building principal at McLaughlin Middle School. So many of us in this organization have learned from his mentorship, and we are just so grateful to have him still partnering with Pasco School District as one of our leadership coaches through OSPI. So I'm going to give a little bit of background before Dr. McGuire starts. So I'm going to just ask Dr. McGuire's patience here. He knows I'm long-winded. So this really is a foundational presentation that's going to build, that has a couple different purposes. One, we do have a new ESSA accountability structure under the reauthorization of ESSA, and it's important for all of us to start to know and understand what that's going to mean for us in the short term and the long term. So certainly that's absolutely a purpose for tonight's presentation. But it also is foundationary to two presentations that will be coming up. Immediately following this one next week, or next a board meeting, Mark and I will do a presentation that ties this accountability structure to the benchmarking system that we've been working on specific to our outrageous outcomes. And then the first board meeting in February, Carla Lobos will be doing a presentation, probably Carla and Suzanne Hall actually will be doing the presentation that takes the accountability structure and the outrageous outcomes and connects what does that look like then at the building level? How will they use the data to drive decision making at that point? So again, a couple of different purposes for this presentation that again is pretty foundationary to the work moving forward. So with that long-winded introduction, again, it is just our great honor to have a continued partner and support in Dr. Dennis McGuire.
Thank you, Superintendent Whitney. You've been waiting 10 years to do that, right?
Hey, Scott, shut that light off or we'll have to move Aaron back there. Give him another chance.
Board President Christensen, board members, and Superintendent Whitney, it's my pleasure to be here. I haven't been at this podium for a few years, but first of all, this is an opportunity to give you an overview. One, I don't know all the details of ESSA at this point in time because it's still slightly wet concrete. And it's within the form. We've got some givens, but we have some unknowns. And we were at a webinar yesterday, and they let us know that they have a new update. I took a quick look at it before coming here, and I see a whole bunch of things crossed out and new, it looks like a legal document with new entries. So there have been some changes, but what I'm trying to present this evening is just going to be things that we're all pretty confident are going to play out. Some of the fine-tuning pieces, some of the exact calculations when it comes to numbers and so forth are still being developed. The word we have is that the federal government will approve our plan by January 18th after we have apparently submitted the recent tweaks to the plan. Just a quick history, if you're not aware, 1965 is when the Elementary Secondary Education Act was formed under President Johnson, shortly after I graduated from Pasco High. So you can see it's been a few years that this plan has been a federal government plan, and it's been centered around on his war of poverty, of providing resources to districts across the nation to provide extra resources for kids that come from poverty and other situations. The last iteration of this was the No Child Left Behind, approved in 2002. This iteration, the Every Student Succeeds Act, was approved by Congress in 2015. They're just now getting to the implementation process of this document and so forth. There were a number of work teams that have worked over the last year through OSPI and the state to develop this plan. And these elements you see up here were kind of the framework in setting this Accountability Act in motion for the state of Washington. There's a need to differentiate schools annually based on indicators. This is a federal requirement. We weighted the indicators, included differentiating schools based on subgroups, as we'll see a little bit later. The need to identify schools because there's a federal requirement that, and if you receive Title I funds, federal funds, you have to have a plan to support buildings who are scoring in the lowest, or the lowest 5% schools that are scoring on the Smarter Balance Assessment. Must be provided additional support and identified. That would be the same for high schools with graduation rate less than 67%. We don't have to worry about that at this point in time as we move forward. So, and there's two levels of support: comprehensive support, which is the more intense support for schools and districts, and the targeted support, which is less intensive, which means less money or resources for districts and schools. And we'll show you shortly here how that comes about. This document here is kind of the framework. This is the given. This isn't going to change. You'll see some numbers there. They changed in the last 24 hours, so we had to make some adjustments, but I'll talk about those in a second. As you can see that on the left-hand side, and I believe you have a hard copy too, because as we go through this presentation, I need to come back to this. But the measures are proficiency, and that's proficiency on the Smarter Balance Assessment in ELA and math. And at some point in time, science will be drug into this equation, but that may not happen till 2021 or later. At the elementary and middle school level, student growth, which is a new measure. It has not really been used by either the federal government or the state to monitor student progress across the board. And I personally, my personal bias is I think this is one of the best pieces of the new act because, I'll share a little later, it really gives you a different perspective on what's happening sometimes. And the last category, English learner progress, which has now become a very high priority in our state, obviously, and it is a major part of the Accountability Act. Now, at the high school level, the one difference is around graduation rate. That is the high priority item there. They don't have a student growth, and you'll see a little later why that factor is not part of their accountability process. The other element there is school quality or student success at the elementary and middle school and the high school. Chronic absenteeism is a major indicator. At the high school, you also have ninth graders on track, and you have advanced course taking as elements there. The numbers are the weighting. So when we do all these calculations, and I say we loosely, that's not me at all, but when the state does all these calculations, then each of the scores are weighted. And you can see by the weights that student growth and graduation are the highest weighted indicators. Proficiency is the second, English language learners, and then at the high school level, you've got three areas that are comprise 15% of their total weight because of obviously those three areas.
Dr. McGuire, can I ask a question here? Just
no problem.
So are these benchmarks set by the state? Was this what the state proposed, or was this what came from the federal level that this is what we had to do?
Everything, the federal government set a parameter.
Okay.
And everything that you'll see tonight was developed by work teams here in the state of Washington.
Okay.
In response to those frameworks.
All right.
Things like proficiency and growth and English learners, we had to address those issues as far as the feds were concerned. But how we do that, what it looks like, that was ours.
Thank you.
And please feel free to interrupt if you have a question, because a little bit later I'm getting into some things that might require some questions or clarity. And I don't have all the answers, I'll tell you that tonight. So the first level is how do we start calculating numbers? And I'm going to move through this somewhat quickly because I think it takes about 5 times to really go through this. But the bottom line is, previously up to this point, because we the state have to identify the lowest 5% schools performing on the Smarter Balance Assessment across the state. And how they used to do that is everybody took the test, let's say at the elementary level, and then they made a stack with all the schools, and what was the 5 lowest percentage, in essence of if there were 1,000 schools, what was 5% of those schools' scores and at the bottom of the list. The problem was that could change year by year. So next year, you could move up or out or down, but not really know that because it was really dependent on the scores that came in that year. So honestly, it wasn't a very good system because it wasn't equitable. You didn't know where you stand. You didn't know what the target was. So in an attempt to address that issue, they've developed this process. And basically, again, we're talking about a stack. We have 10 boxes there, as you see. And let's say you had 1,000 elementary schools in the state, which you do at least. First thing they would do is take those 1,000 schools and put 100 in each one of those boxes, approximately. Could be 98, could be 102. And what were their, from low scores to high scores? And then what scores looked like. And at some point there, they would say your score, for example, if this school was 62%, that's where they would fall on that stack. And in a minute, you'll see how that works. But the point being that this will last for 3 years. So if I'm an elementary principal, I know, gee, my school was 62% on math. If I do X, Y, and Z, I can move up because the next level, the numbers on the right-hand side of this chart show you where I have to go. 62%, well, if I get to 64 or 68%, I go to level 6 or level 7 or farther, depending on. So it becomes a clearer metric of what I have to do to get to the next level.
Dr. McGuire, can I
Yes.
ask a question? Okay, so this whole presentation's on calculating some kind of accountability number, but at a high level, what does the accountability number mean? What does it mean to Pasco if we're in the bottom 5% or somewhere else? And what does that mean for resources or punishments or whatever it is? Can you give us a high level description of that?
What has occurred up to this point, and which is still being developed, but what has occurred up to this point, for example, those schools that were identified in the bottom 5% were called priority schools. They've received $30,000 a year plus a leadership coach to work with them. And that's gone on for, I think, 5 years now. If you were a priority school or a focus school, which was another category where you may have just had 1 or 2 things that you needed to work on, and say math or something like that, you got a few less dollars and you didn't have a coach. Now, the state has not defined, other than there's going to be resources available for schools once this thing is all in place. So I don't know, I'm going to assume the dollars are going to still be there, but beyond that, I don't know what it looks like.
So at a high level, there's a new way to calculate this accountability number, and in the past, the low-performing schools get more money, and other than that, it doesn't impact us much.
Well, the one difference that this year,
What else? How
is-
does it impact?
going forward, is it used to be in the state of Washington, and this federal law in general is for Title I schools only. Washington State decided to take a different tack. This is a requirement for all schools. So there's going to be Title I dollars and there's going to be state education dollars put into that pot. So if you're not a Title I district, every school in the state falls under these guidelines, under these requirements. So some kind of support will come to those schools.
I think another benefit, if I understand correctly, is the state is making this widely available. So these measures and numbers will be available on the OSPI website. So it'll be much easier to compare schools and school districts. And I really like this personally because it's much more detailed. If you look at the traditional, you're going to move to an area, pull them up online, and you look at the grades of the schools, it's essentially just the test scores of that school. But that really doesn't answer the question about that school or district. When you add proficiency and growth, Well, then that pulls in, well, where did we start with? Did we start low and they've grown a lot, but they're still low? Or were we already good and they actually got a little worse, but they're still pretty high? And so it kind of tries to address some of those caveats. But then I will say also, as I understand, if you're very proficient, it's a little bit harder to grow when you already reach a certain level of proficiency. So it's much easier for like that progress that's in the last decile. Well, that's a lot of room for growth, and that may look dramatic. Whereas if you're already at the 8, you're not going to be able to grow as much. So, but the increased transparency and accountability to the public, I think, is a great benefit to this model.
Can I ask one more question, maybe of Ms. Whitney, or if it's too long of an answer, you can send the answer to us. How does a district use these results? Do we use them at all, other than getting money, not getting money? And maybe it's a long answer that you can answer later.
So I can answer how we've used it in the past in a different setting or later on. I think what I want to be clear about here is how we'll be using this moving forward is in our comprehensive approach to monitoring those outrageous outcomes. And we are tying those two things together. So the board has been patient in allowing myself and fellow staff to explore what other districts and organizations were doing in terms of accountability. And because of that, it has positioned us to be able to really maximize what the state has here and those pieces that make sense for us. So it will be a very usable tool for us. So I think for me, that's the actual more important part of that answer is moving forward, we're integrating it into our system for really monitoring the outrageous outcomes.
Do you anticipate any problems with the fact that this is a moving target? You could actually do better in proficiency, better in growth, and actually be a level 5 and be a level 4 the next year if all of the other schools do that much better in proficiency and that much better in growth.
This is, the word transparency, I think, is important because it really is much clearer than the system we've had in place. It is a 3-year window. They may extend that, but the 3-year window, you'll be able to see yourself move up. If you slip back, then honestly, it doesn't matter where you are. If you're going backwards, you're in trouble. So the key here is that if, in a minute, there's a slide that comes up that shows a threshold line.
So I think if we can get through these slides, let's move through this, and then some of these more general questions I think we can ask once we get through these numbers, if that works. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Okay. The next step is that for every this report you see in front of you is called multiple measures, and every school will get this report. And you see in the first 2 columns on the left, or 3 columns, are proficiency. That's based on the Smarter Balance Assessment. 1 for ELA, 1 for math, and 1 for science. As I said previously, science will come in probably in 2021, but right now it's just a placeholder. It won't count for the next 3 years at least. The growth, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, is measured off of the Smarter Balance Assessment in ELA and math. So how much progress is a student over 2 or 3 or 4 years making in math when they take the Smarter Balance assessment? So, and that reports will be available individually, by school, and by district. So you have a picture of the student growth that's occurring in those areas.
So on this particular slide, this is for a school?
Correct.
And would this be?
A district would have something similar.
Okay, but each one of our schools would have this slide that would show proficiency in these areas, growth in these areas. All right, thank you.
Exactly. And again, it will be posted on OSPI's website. They're developing a new website arena for this. Then you have ELP progress, English language progress. Graduation for high schools. Then you have the 3 school quality and student success factors. The high schools have 3 of these, but everybody else just has the 1 for attendance. And these are modeled on real test scores in the state of Washington. But this was just a modeling to see what would happen if you use this kind of a setup or framework for assessment. And you can see that when you look at these, that even though the 1,000 elementary schools, for example, as I said earlier, are in each of these deciles, the range of scores varies. You look at EL progress, the lowest one is 48%. You look at graduation, 10 is the lowest. So it's going to vary by category, but it's going to be focused on that category so you can compare it across the systems, both internally and externally.
And these are set, this is the 3-year number, for lack of a better term.
Not at this point, no, this is just a model. That has not been set. That won't be set, I don't believe, until March.
Right, this is just a model, but the idea is that this represents the previous 3 years. I'm not clear on what this, is this a 3-year rolling average, or is it?
Yes.
So
And
every
which
year
we've
it
used
gets
in the past.
updated,
Right.
but it's using 3 years of data, averaging 3 years of data to get this year's data.
Right. There's one exception, and that would be on the ELPA 21 test that's used for English language learners.
Okay.
But they just have a 2-year window at this point. But
Okay.
3-year will be the window to keep rolling, which has been in place for 15 years.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Now, once the school gets this, then a calculation is run by you combining all the proficiency scores, you combine all of the growth scores, and at the high school level, you combine all of the SQSS indicators. Because there's a calculation that they demonstrated to us that is interesting, but we're not going into that at all. But, and it's related to the weight that's shown on this slide. So they do a calculation and then times the weight to get a final calculation, which could look like this. This one has a proficiency, growth, EL progress, graduation, and SQSS. So everything has been combined into these columns. And for example, this one has growth, which a high school, remember, doesn't have. But the other, and graduation, an elementary school doesn't have. But the point being is you take all those other previous ones and combine them. Once that combination is done, and here's an example of an elementary school, you've got proficiency, growth, EL progress, and regular attendance. So the elementary school is going to have 4 columns at this point. And then across the state, a threshold will be identified. And in the example is here, it's decile 3. And if you work your way to the left again, you can see 2 of the categories here, or one of the categories here is below decile 3. Once that measure is set on the lowest 5% scorings across the board, so that meets the federal requirement. That line will stay in place for 3 years at least. And then you have targeted schools, which are schools, again, this is a school, another report that the schools will get that breaks down each subgroup, again, on the same achievement data, smarter balance. And then there's the threshold line, and you'll notice this school has 4 areas that are below the threshold line. They would be identified as having to address those 4 areas. It could be 1 area, it could be 5 areas, it could be 3, whatever. But that threshold line holds for everything.
And that's the bottom 25%?
No, that line's the bottom 5%.
On the graph, though, it shows it going above the number 1, number 2, number 3 would be the 30th percentile
No.
up to the, it doesn't?
No, remember,
Because then I'm really lost.
if you look at,
Because like on that, one of the third, like the third page, school performance by major, 1 to 10 skills that such that 10% of the schools in each, and even spread of schools from 1 to 10. So there's 10% of schools that's what it says, 10% of schools in 1, 10% of schools in 2. If you go back to the third slide.
Right, if you look at these 4 columns here on this slide, notice the numbers on the right-hand side. Each area has a different set. For example, the bottom decile of this column is 0 to 53. The bottom decile is 0 to 48. 0 to 37, 0. So each of these vertical bars has a different set of numbers because one's measuring smarter balance, one's measuring student growth, one's measuring ELPA 21 assessments, and one is measuring attendance. So there are different rules on how that's measured. But the percentage for each of these columns is slightly different. Then they combine that mathematically and come up with a cut line. So if you score below the cut line, then you need to address the needs identified. I see exactly what you're saying, and I know that's the confusing part. But the point is, those vertical bars all represent a different set of numbers. But they combine them into one number, and then they weight them. So the first bar at the elementary level is, what, 40% now? The growth bar is 50%, EL progress is 5%, and the regular attendance is 5%. So when you start weighting things out there.
I understand the weighting perfectly. I get that, how each one of those is weighted differently, and then it goes into your scores that at the very end. But on the third slide of this thing, it says 10% of schools in the number 1, 10% of schools in number 2, 10% of schools in number 3. So to me, that means that these are in the bottom 10th percentiles, 20th percentiles, and the line is drawn at the bottom 25th percentile. So schools scoring in the lowest 25 percentile or less are going to be recognized. So anyway, I mean, I completely understand how those other things are weighted before they go into them. I just don't understand how.
Is this the slide you're referring to? Or one prior?
No, prior, yes, that one. See, 10% of schools in 10, 10% of schools in 9, 10% of schools in 8.
But the thing to notice is once you put, all you're doing is arbitrarily putting approximately 10 schools or 100 schools, depending on what your 10 is, in each of these.
Absolutely.
boxes. Then you look at their scores.
The scores are different.
Right.
Absolutely, because the scores will.
So this isn't, 10%, 20%, 30% per se.
No, but it represents 25% of the schools. It doesn't represent 25% as a score. It represents 25% of the schools. But in so I just want to understand the data, because it looks like they are taking 25% of the schools and identifying them for targeted support. But on the headlines, it says that 5% of the schools are identified for target support. Is that line just not drawn in the correct place, or am I not understanding something?
You're not understanding.
So there's not so each one of those doesn't represent 10% of the schools. I understand the numbers are different because the scores are going to be different. But those scores that's the average score for 10% of the schools, 20% of the schools, 25% of the schools.
So I think we understand the question, and so I think let us dig into pulling that question apart, Amy, and putting it back together. Like I said, this is the first presentation. It's taken, I think I've heard it 4 or 5 times, and every time I understand a little bit more, but it is complicated. So I think we've heard the question, and let us dig into that and figure out how to bring that information back in a way that lends some clarity to your question.
Build a better graphic.
Yeah, I think the challenge is they're combining all of these metrics into a single line across there. And that single line, although it looks like it's at the 25th percentile, when you combine the high ones, the high numbers, like, well, the one that had 60 and above, with the ones that have a wider distribution, it ends up looking like the 25th percentile. Because it's going across all bands, it's not considering them all individually. And so those schools, so you could be in the 25th percentile in this graphic and still be getting help in one of those areas.
Oh, absolutely, you could still be getting help in one of those areas because but this almost indicates that you're getting help if you're, anyway, anywhere below the 25th percentile in schools.
And we'll look at how we can put a graphic together that could clarify that. And again, this is this last slide here. I think this is our last slide with these kinds of charts. But this school overall is doing quite well, as you can see, given the threshold. But they have 4 areas that they need to address. And a reminder that before, it would have just been around Title I schools. Now all schools are falling under this category. So honestly, across the state, there are a lot of schools that aren't Title I schools that are probably going to find themselves for the first time in school improvement. Because I will lay odds, and knowing some of my colleagues and what they're dealing with, they've got at least one of these columns that would be below the threshold. And so it is a whole different environment that we're moving into as far as the state system is set up.
So on this slide right here, so they're going to get assistance in those areas
It's 4 areas.
specifically. And it's going to be up to them. I mean, I'm assuming that's going to be some kind of monetary assistance, and they'll have to make sure it gets directed towards those programs. Is that?
That's a very good question.
Okay.
In the application, it leaves it open if there's enough money to go to this level. For the schools that are identified across the spectrum, the priority schools, the comprehensive schools, they'll be guaranteed resources. These schools may just have to, and the districts within that have those schools may have to look at resources, but they'll have to develop some response to the results. The student growth percentiles, I said, to me, is really a measure I'm glad is part of that because of this whole process, because it shows that growth. And that's really the key. When we don't pay attention to student growth, I think that's where we get ourselves in trouble. Because that kid that can slip, even though as hard as you're working at it. And I know for a number of years we've looked at gainers and sliders and so forth, trying to monitor those kids. And this system is already set up. It has been used a little bit by the state board to recognize schools, but they haven't done a lot with it. But now it is going to be officially part of the system. And it will look at grades 4 through 8 because it takes at least 2 years of data. It's based on the Smarter Balance, ELA and math at this point, and will be science in the future. So a 4th grader has had, if they've been in that school or that district since 3rd grade, they have 2 data points on Smarter Balance. So you've got a short span or a short growth pattern. Okay. Over time, they could, up through 8th grade, then they have a significant number. So you can really see how kids are progressing based on the Smarter Balance assessment and other assessments that are going on. And schools are going to be rewarded for that. And I did a little research. One of the schools I'm working with just pulled up, the data hasn't been updated yet, but 2016 data, when I looked at all the elementary schools in the Pasco School District, one of the schools that I'm assigned to was the 3rd highest school ELA student progress, student growth. But they were struggling in other areas. But that is a win because, okay, what did that school do to get those kids moving in that area? How can you expand that across your school and or your system? So I think this is going to be a very powerful and eye-opening experience for us all. But I really think it's a good step in the right direction as we move forward. English language proficiency is a major area. The left-hand side, I'm not going to worry a lot about, but the right-hand side, the most important thing to me is the progress measure for accountability. And that OSPI has finally realized that it takes 6 years for students who come at ground zero in language to get to a level where they can academically be proficient. and academically participate at a high level. And I have to thank Liz Flynn for that. I came here in 2000. She cornered me right away, and we worked for a long time trying to convince OSPI that 3 years, which is what they believed, was the window. And we've got that 6-year in here now, which is going to benefit our kids greatly. They're going to have the opportunity to grow and reach that. But it is going to be an accountability thing. So obviously we have to make sure those kids are making appropriate progress. And that'll be measured in this chart here, because all those students take the ELPA 21. And so a kid that comes in at the emerging or the bottom level that has no English language skills at that point in time has 6 years to get to the highest level in ELPA. So wherever the student comes in at, they have up to 6 years. They could have 1 year because, you know, they just need a short period of time. They may need 3 years. They may need 4 years. They may need 5 years. So there's more realistic accountability for those students in reaching that level. At this point, they haven't set what is the, you know, what is the mark? How many kids have to be moving in the right direction to meet the accountability criteria? They haven't set that. So my anticipation is by January 18th, when the feds are supposedly approving the plan, they will have to have set that criteria. Also, any school in the state that isn't demonstrating language proficiency growth for its students will be identified in a special category. That's what it says, and be required. And I've worked with a number of schools. That's the one area that their kids aren't performing. So under the new law, they would be identified for that particular area. None of the schools here in Pasco fit that. These are other schools I've worked with across the state. The SQSS, or the School Quality and Student Success criteria, chronic absence, that's being determined exactly what it looks like. The definition they have in place right now is 2 full-day absences in a 30-day period. So that will be adjusted, and the district will have to respond to that if there needs to be any policy change. 9th graders on track. The percent of first-time 9th grade students who earned credit for all attempted courses. In other words, a 9th grade student comes in and whatever class they take, they need to pass it in order to be considered on track. And that will be a real measure that's part of the accountability piece as we move forward. And that will be a challenge for all of us. Dual credit, and this is to reinforce the idea of kids taking dual credit courses such as AP classes, tech prep, running start, all of those kinds of other options that our high school kids have in order to either go to a higher level or get through high school faster or go to the community college. How many of our kids are taking those kinds of classes? How many of those classes are kids being successful in? So that's the last category. So that's what we know at this point in time. Hopefully by January 18th, we have a clear picture of what this should look like as far as specifics. And as I said, our understanding is probably by March, the official data points will come out, and we will all move forward from that point. Questions?
I think part of my concerns with this model is, you know, we want to always be moving up in this model, but the problem is it's comparison with all of the schools across Washington. So if you move up, another school has to move down. So basically, half of the schools, well, it could stay the same, so who knows what the percentage is, but if you move up, somebody else is going to have to go down. So you could actually improve in growth, you could improve in proficiency, and you could improve in attendance, and you could still lower a level because other schools improve more. Is there any are they going to break this down enough that will show us, okay, this was your growth, you're making progress in all of these, just other schools made more progress.
The data will be distributed exactly like that.
Exactly like this, or exactly like
What you're
I
saying,
said?
in a sense, you'll have results knowing how many students moved
In
up
each area.
in each of those areas.
And then we'll see this data as well, and then we'll see a final score.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of these charts are based on individual student data, so you'll have a data package that will show that kind of growth. The schools will know at each grade level what kind of progress their kids are making.
So, and then to be very clear, because it wasn't clear in this, only the bottom 5% of schools will be receiving, basically will be, you need to improve your scores, you need to do this, receiving help from the state. It is the bottom 5%, correct? It's not the bottom 25%.
Well, at this point that I'm aware of, they will be the only ones receiving
Okay.
additional monetary. Every school that's identified, whether it's in that category, the bottom 5%, or, for example, the school that has one or two categories, they'll be required to do some things, but there may not be additional resources to do that. And that's where, and that's for all schools, not just Title I schools, which is truly a different model than has ever existed in this state before.
Well, I think there's some great things, and I love what they've done with the English language learners and that extended time, because when you give them that time, then they can become proficient in both Spanish and English, and that's critical. And then they do better in life in lots of other ways. So there's some really good things. I still am concerned about it being a comparison model. It would be next to impossible to always improve. We could always improve, but it would be next to impossible for us to always increase a higher level in this model, and that does concern me.
I think the challenge with that is we've got to change our perception. So in graduation rates, that's fixed, right? So if you're graduating over 67%, well, just looking at this slide here, then you're supposedly a successful school. Well, all the schools could be above 67%, and there's still going to be somebody in the bottom 5% of that. And that's, so instead of looking at them as failing, then we should look at them as, okay, you're in the bottom 5%, we're going to help you rather than identify you as a failing school. I think that's where we're going to get into some challenges. But I don't expect the data will be so tight that we can't identify schools that really need help. But anyway, I appreciate your presentation, Dr. McGuire. Does anybody have any other questions?
I just wanted to thank you. I think this is a great start. There's clearly some things that are still being worked out by the state. I like the transparency and accountability. Of course, it brings up other issues, like that if we're basing on a test, well then now if everyone knows it's going to be broadcast to the state and anyone else who wants to look it up, there's a tendency to, okay, we got to focus on improving our test scores. Or if it's ninth grade, we're just measuring how many students don't fail a class, well then there's a tendency, well maybe let's make it a little bit easier. And so, and some at an extreme would even cheat and help the students. Look no further than Atlanta, Georgia, or other areas that have done it. So we know that happens, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And I agree it's somewhat painful to be measured and shown exactly where you fall, even though you may be good at certain things, that you're one of the lowest, one of the lowest in our state in that area. But that's how life is in many ways. If you apply for a job and there's 30 applicants, you're essentially ranked and you're picked. That you assume that they choose the highest rank with all their measures. And so, I mean, it's reality. It is painful in some ways, but I'm confident that our teachers and staff will help use this model. And I appreciate the district incorporating it into kind of our goals, and a lot of it aligns really well, and we'll just do the best we can. And it's exciting. Yeah, Mr. President, if there's teachers in our audience that want to make comments, I think that'd be great if we have that chance. It looks like some would like to.
Any other questions for the board for Dr. McGuire? So, thank you, Dr. McGuire. We'll look forward to further progress on this. Okay, so we will open it up if you have a comment. Again, I'm sure you have good information, but if you can try and limit it to 2 minutes or less, thank you.
So, Maria Lee, Pasco citizen. I just have a couple quick questions. I'm wondering about the workload. Have they predicted the workload or the impact that it's going to have on teachers? And also, what is the intent of this? Is this to make our schools competitive with one another? And what kind of impact is that going to have on our students?
So I'm going to defer to Superintendent Whitney, if we don't have an answer, I'm sure we can get some
Yeah,
information.
let me do some research into those, Maria, and get back to you.
Yeah, great.
We can totally touch base. Yeah, if you can email those, that'd be great, or call. Thank you.
Hi, I'm April Payne. I am a McGee teacher, and I'm also a brand-new citizen of Pasco as of August. So I'm a data person. I do like data. That was my major. So I'm concerned about, and maybe it was mentioned before, but where those percentages are coming from. Like Amy, I'm very concerned with that moving because, as Marie was saying, can be a competitive type thing. We can always hope for the positive that it doesn't turn out that way, but in reality, that is what happens. So having that moving target and where those percentages come from to start with is concerning for me because this is brand new. So I'm not sure if teachers were involved, how many teachers were involved, were they classroom teachers, were they just high school, were they elementary, was it a combination? Just have a lot of detailed questions regarding that because we do want to measure schools based on reality. And we want to make sure that all schools are successful, but it does concern me that why can't all Washington schools not have a 5%? I mean, that's an outrageous outcome, but it seems like the state is not allowing that. So I'm just wondering where those percentages are coming from.
Okay, I'm not sure we have an answer for that.
I know,
other
there's some
than
of
a
these
magic
things.
number.
Yeah, that are the state's gonna have to answer.
And so if I'm understanding what you're asking here, how did we identify 5% versus 10%?
Well, where I was noticing like the cutoff and there was different placements for the percentages for ELA was up ELA was down, math was up, the EL was way down at the bottom. I mean, like I didn't quite understand where those percentages came from and why it almost looked like to me that's where the expectation was. And if you got up higher, then, good for you. But I was wondering why all the different up and down roller coaster kind of thing was on one of the slides. If you see the one, just on any of the bars, it has that.
Yeah, if our math scores are in the 80th percentile and the whole state gets the 80th percentile, there's still gonna be a bottom 5% of all the schools in the 80th percentile. But if we get to the 80th percentile, we will have so much to celebrate, even if we are in the bottom 5th percentile.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I mean, we can all succeed. Even the lowest percentile could be, if everyone happens to graduate 96% and you're the lowest at 95.2, that's great. I mean, but the challenge, and I see what you're saying, Ms. Payne, I agree with you, and it can be painful to, when I was in graduate school, we were ranked every single person to the nth degree, every test score, and you got an exact, you are ranked 127th out of 250, and so it can be painful, but we're still, the 127th could still be successful, and so, but it is, I'm interested to see as well how this pans out. I think the things were just kind of an example. I don't think they were in the actual school. It's just kind of an idea of there'll be different ratings but yeah, we definitely need more data and I don't know all the details of how they did this. I imagine they had a big group of, I think I read like some parents and teachers, kind of like we try to do, but it probably could have been more comprehensive, I would imagine.
I'm guessing the numbers were probably put together by a bunch of engineers crunching those things in the background. So
They are good at numbers.
that's probably where the problem comes. Is overthinking.
I do love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I do love that they pull out Asian, Black, EL, Hispanic, low income, Smith. I love that they disaggregate it to that degree. And even if these are an average of different numbers, that we know how every subgroup is performing relative to the state, because the average of the state should be right at that 50th percentile, and then relative to other subgroups throughout the state. So I think that's really critical.
Any other comments for the board on this particular subject? If not, we will go to 10A. We'll go to agenda item 10A, outrageous outcomes, extracurricular. Michelle Whitney.
So my presentation will absolutely be much more abbreviated and much more simple. So good evening, President Christensen, members of the board. It's my pleasure to be in front of you this evening to do the final of 5 updates on our outrageous outcomes. This one's specific to extracurricular. Again, just a reminder, we do have 5 outrageous outcomes that really, when combined, create that trajectory of success for our students that really we feel like will launch them into a successful career and livelihood outside of the walls of Pasco School District. I just wanted to remind the board and to provide a context for the slide you're going to see next. This year, in 17-18, we are just now implementing the new data collections method that will for the first time reflect that comprehensive approach to analyzing and, well, actually collecting data for all of the quote-unquote extracurricular activities that we have K-12. The only data that the district has collected to this point in any consistent way is that around athletics. So the next slide that you will see are 2 data points only for athletics. But the promise is that next year, or for the next round of outrageous outcomes, we will be able to provide a more comprehensive picture of all of the things that we offer students, because certainly we offer many, many other extracurricular activities currently for our kids beyond athletic programs. We just haven't been consistent in the way that we've collected that data. So to fix that, we've identified all of the groups or categories of data that we'll be collecting grades 4 to 12, things like athletics, clubs that have to do with academics, service, community, career vocation, performing arts. And just a reminder that the way that we've defined quote-unquote extracurricular for grades K-3 is really that parent-school connection. So we'll be collecting parent-teacher conference attendance data. And the idea is if we can get parents and kids engaged early, grades K-3, then that handoff to providing kids a connection to extracurricular activities, we're setting the foundation for that in K-3. And that was really an answer to some concern around, is it developmentally appropriate to require a kindergartner to be after school without parents, et cetera. So we felt like this was a nice path forward to build that foundation and focusing on the parent relationship with students, parent, teacher, student relationship in grades K-3 to prepare kids for the confidence to eventually participate in an extracurricular activity for 12. So that's the recommended approach at this time. Certainly we can always make modifications moving forward, but this is where we felt like was a nice common ground to start. Data will be collected in PowerSchool, and then also that will then be able to be fed and then tie into the data dashboard. So we'll have a nice, slick, clean way to collect more comprehensive data starting this year in 17-18. So I really only have one chart for you that is around athletics, and there's 3 kind of areas of celebration where over 50% of our middle school students participate in athletics. And over 25% of our high school students participate in athletics. And those data represent an increase in participation at both middle school and high school. We have so many things. It's always a slippery slope when you start to point out individual programs because we have so many things to celebrate, from our award-winning teachers and kids in performing arts. And our performing arts groups are always being invited to very prestigious events to perform, et cetera. I do want to highlight, however, one of the things I think we're all really excited about and maybe most proud of this year is our ability to implement a swim team, both our girls' swim team this fall and now currently our boys are swimming. Each of those teams, right? Do I hear applause? I love it. Thank you. Those teams are having such success, and it's really, they practice together as Chihuahua and Pasco High, and they really love it. So we're very proud of them. I just saw a Twitter notification that our boys from both Pasco High and Chihuahua have done well in the swim meet that I believe is probably occurring right now. So just one example of many of the things that we can be proud of in terms of our extracurricular offerings. The reason I highlight swim is that it's our newest. It also has been a tremendous collaborative effort between Pasco School District and the city of Pasco, and we're really looking forward to having some continued dialogue with them around co-facilities, usage, et cetera. So,
Can I just ask, where do they swim?
So our girls, we used the City of Pasco pool because it was in the fall. The boys, because it's winter, we did have to explore. And that was a very diligent effort on Assistant Superintendent Bowles. He literally went to every facility in the Tri-Cities that had a pool and sat down with the person and like, hey, can we use your pool? And we did get Kiora Fitness in Kennewick to agree to allow our boys to swim in their facility. So we're thankful for the partnership with Kiora Fitness in Kennewick, and we look forward to looking at opportunities to potentially partner with the city even around our boys moving forward.
Kia Ora, is that what you
Kia
said?
Ora, is that how you say it? Kia Ora. Mhm.
Yeah, okay. And approximately how many boys?
Yeah,
You know?
Do I have I'm looking for a high school rep in the house.
Just, I mean, is it
We're not-
5? Is
No,
it
no, no, it's
25?
in its teens, 20s.
Okay.
Is your son coaching? Is it about that in the 20s? Yeah. It was a significant number, yeah.
Well, look at the increase. It's, when you're talking about that many kids, I bet the increase in the high school has something to do with that swim team.
Yeah, yeah. So again, just one example of many examples of things we can be proud of.
Are the principals working on things to enable? I just know, in there's some sports that cut quite a bit of kids. And what I love about McLaughlin is no kids are cut. And if you go to a smaller school, you would see this sports number go way up. There are kids that want to participate in sports that can't.
Yes.
And that's my concern. I don't care to say, no, you need to do sports rather than music, but if a child or a student is interested in sports, I want them to have that ability. And I know my son's basketball team cuts more people than they retain. And I'm sure less people even try out because they know they're going to get cut. So are we looking into ways to not cut kids?
I can absolutely have Mr. Bowles record that question and get you an answer. I honestly am not sure what our principals are currently looking at. What I do know, however, is the student voice piece of this. Clearly, that was also an interest of our Student Advisory Council. So just by way of context, the Superintendent Student Advisory Council, we meet 6 times a year. There's about 30 high school kids on that group. One of the activities that we did early on this fall is to collect some student voice around if we're serious as a district to getting to this 100% around our outrageous outcomes, what could we do differently? And the kids all had collaborative dialogue around that. And I've, the last handful of reports and updates I've done, Amy represented an interest in us looking at that as well. Their input really could be organized into 3 broad categories. One, their suggestion was, hey, why don't you look at aligning the things you guys are offering with stuff we're interested in, which, yes, that makes sense to me as well. One of the things, the way that they framed that was really around teachers and instructors who are passionate about the activities that they are advising, really inspire kids to want to get involved and even try things that maybe they didn't think they would like because the teacher's so excited about it. And also talking about adding additional offerings or new sports to the repertoire. I do know that we survey our students regularly as part of our Title IX requirement, where we ask students, what are some of the other sports you want to participate in? And that is where we got data around, or that supported the request to look at adding swim. So we do use that data for that regard. The other thing that the Student Advisory Council talked about was increasing program access by decreasing barriers. And they had a really robust discussion about the recognition that there are students in our school system, and more than I think what they initially thought, that have some barriers to accessing because of the expense of some of the sports. And we do have mechanisms to support our kids and families. And the general sense from the Student Advisory Council is that students aren't aware of what those are. And so how do we do a better job in making sure that, and advertising that, and providing students a way where they can request support that aligns with protecting their dignity as well. So there was a very robust discussion around that. And then things that you may have heard before, another suggestion was, could some sports be elective classes? Could clubs meet before school and on the weekends, not always just after school, to accommodate for students who work? could we increase sizes of teams or offer more sports? For example, having varsity, junior varsity, C teams, B teams, E teams, et cetera, kind of that models the no-cut policy at the middle school. And then the other piece that they really talked about in depth was around increasing awareness of opportunities for students, parents, and community. They had kind of a continuum of suggestions in terms of, let's do something during school hours where students are required to attend a rotation of some kind where they learn about all the clubs and sports that are out there, or maybe even doing an assembly during second or third period to inform students about clubs. And really, the core of this for them was highlighting the purpose. Why is it important for you as a student in Pasco School District to be in a club, sport, et cetera? And then they had suggestions like use video, newspaper, guest speakers to promote involvement in extracurricular activities. And I don't know if the board has seen, but the Pasco School District or the Pasco High School did what they call a hype video. And that's an example of one of the videos. Their newest one is a rap song that was written by our students, and it's pretty amazing. Matter of fact, it was on 88.1. I was in my car and heard it on the radio the other day. So, again, utilizing the talents of our students to really utilize mechanisms like video, et cetera, to highlight our programs. And again, really connecting it back to why is it important for you to get involved. One of our own student board reps talked about, knowing that there's students that aren't involved and thinking about what would it look like if I went and invited someone and actually brought them with me to a club and encouraged them to be engaged in a club that they maybe weren't before. So lots of opportunities to get better, and certainly a worthy goal for us to continue to focus on. With
Can I
that,
make an observation and maybe a recommendation on that previous page with the student voice. Some of the students on your advisory panel, they're all high schoolers, may think back to when they were younger. But looking at, and they might have made comments on this, maybe not. It looked like a lot of those comments were what we can do in the high school right now. But looking back through an equity lens, in order to make a lot of these teams, whether it's basketball or football or soccer, you need to have, some kids are naturals, but a lot of the kids that end up making that are the kids whose parents invest in those resources at a young age. So we have after school all-stars that we started a few years ago, and we have some work I think we could do there to make it an equitable opportunities for kids, because what I see going to these schools is that the programs that are offered through our programs there are based solely on which teachers want to volunteer to teach it, and it's on their interests. We as a district haven't said, in order to be equitable, we should be providing this opportunity for whatever program it is at each school. So you may have a school where the only people who raise their hands are those who like to teach art. So everyone at that school gets art after school all-stars, time after time. And at another school, you may have somebody who's into basketball. But how can we look at it and provide those opportunities, whether it's, we have gyms, open the gym so that 4th through 6th graders can come after school and practice at all the schools, or whether it's soccer, in the spring, or baseball. But how can we provide more of those opportunities so that kids are getting equitable opportunities to succeed when they get to the high school level, if sports or what some kids want to do art, some schools might not be getting art, but to look at it through that lens. So sorry for the long observation.
no, thank you, I appreciate it.
And then one thing, speaking to Ms. Phillips' no-cut policy is, excuse me, is that you kind of have to think about it. And though I'm all for 100% of students being engaged in extracurriculars, when it comes to no-cut for teams, I know track, I want to say cross country, tennis, they're all no-cut sports. And those are generally sports that no matter how good or bad you are, you get to play. But when you think about basketball, and bowling, they don't cut. But when you think about basketball and soccer and baseball, well, when you only get a certain amount of people out on the field, who is the coach going to put out? He's going to put out his best players. So when you think about, no cut, okay, 20 people are going to be on the team, but 11 are out on the field. Well, those 6 people might be on the team, but they won't be 100% engaged in the activity.
Yeah, but and that's a really good point, because I don't think that's a good solution at all. I think those teams, like a basketball team, needs approximately 12 players. That's all they need. I don't want to put 20 players on. That would be, I think that would be a mistake. But by having intramural sports, you know, and having those kids that don't make the team be able to play competitive basketball before school or during lunch, or when those are solutions to allow those kids to still play, and yet even if they don't make the team. And so there's other ways of doing it besides overloading our teams, which I don't think is a good idea.
Yeah, this is great. From a public health standpoint, mental health is a major epidemic in our society, and this is one of the reasons, because some students aren't engaged or connected. They don't feel connected. I'm shocked at how many youth I meet with every day that have literally, they have no interest. What do you like to do? They say nothing. It's home from school, sleep, get on YouTube or Facebook or play a video game and go to bed, and next day do the same thing. I mean, this is a major issue, and I love that we're addressing that. I love that slide with all the student suggestions. Let's start prioritizing those and make it happen. The middle school, I mean, this is shocking. Half of our middle school students participate in sports. That's like 1,500 kids. Go to high school, it's 25%. So we literally just like this huge, hundreds of students suddenly are not engaged, that were engaged in sports. And yeah, I think the solution, intramurals, they may not be able to play, you know, Richland High. They just, you can have involvement, meaningful connections, physical activity and involvement, and then that's just athletics. There's obviously so many more, so I'm excited to see what happens with those recommendations.
I would agree. We've got some creative staff, intramurals is great. When you go to college, there's not many people playing on college sports teams, but people like to play, and so you get out, play on an intramural team. The commitment is not nearly as high, but you get to go out and have fun and get some exercise. So I think there's some creative ways we can look at that. Part of the challenge, fortunately, we're starting to address this, and we'll get to address it more, is facilities. And when we open another middle school, we'll just have that much more opportunity. We'll have that much more growth as well, but we need a new high school. So all of these things will work together. But in the meantime, whatever we can do to accommodate those would be wonderful. So any other comments? Thank you, Ms. Whitney. Anybody in the audience want to make any comment on our extracurricular activities? If not, we will move on to agenda item number 10B, DataByte graduation rates.
So I am just absolutely thrilled to have Suzanne Hall up here to do a DataByte for us as promised at the, oh gosh, I guess it was the meeting at the beginning of December. I had done an outrageous outcome update around our on-track or graduation with a career path, and had promised a deeper dive into some disaggregated graduation rate data. So Suzanne Hall is here to provide that DataByte for us.
Good evening, President Christensen, Superintendent Whitney, and members of the board. And thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on our graduation rates for you this evening. So tracking graduation rates is perhaps the best indicator to verify our progress toward our fifth outrageous outcome, which is 100% of our students graduate and have a clear career path. However, the steps we take towards ensuring progress in each of the outcome areas are critical areas that strongly correlate with graduation and career readiness. The next 4 slides will show the trends of our on-time graduation rates, and we will explore our rates compared to the state by subgroups, and I'll be highlighting some of our celebrations, challenges, and share next steps that we are taking to increase the rates in the coming years. So in this first slide, this provides an overall look at the last 5 years for our district. The blue bar, starting from 2013 to your far left, represents the 4-year on-time graduation rate, and the red bar is the 5-year graduation rate. You can see that the district 4-year rate has leveled off and hovers in the low 70s, whereas the 5-year rate has shown steady incremental growth over the same period from 71.3 to 79.3. So even though the 4-year rate has plateaued, we are seeing more students staying with us an additional year and completing and receiving their diplomas. In 2013, we had roughly 50 students that pursued a fifth year, and last year, about 70 students. So when we compare our four-year graduation rates to the state, which is the top black line, over 7 years, we can see that we are slightly below by about 5%, but reflect the same pattern. The state rate has remained static as well, between 77% and 79%. What is significant and what I'd like to highlight is our achievement based on our demographic comparison, which is in this table, this bar graph below. So for example, in the blue, this is the district, the free and reduced lunch rate for Pasco is 74%, whereas the state, the red, is at 43%. In the second group, we have the bilingual population for Pasco is at 36%, and in the state, it is 11%. The next subgroup that we're looking at is the ethnicity breakdown. For 24% of our students in Pasco are white, and 76% are other, mainly Latino, whereas in the state, only 55% are white and 45% are other. So why am I bringing the demographic information forward, and why are the differences noteworthy? Statistically, the research would predict our performance to be at a substantially lower rate than what it actually is. National trends would project that our achievement rate would be within 10% of our school's non-poverty rate. So what this means is that since Pasco's non-poverty percentage is about 25%, that would translate to an anticipated graduation rate of about 35%. Yet we are performing above this statistic, nearly 48% higher. So clearly we are beating the odds, and the other thing to celebrate is that our 5-year graduation rates are nearly identical to the state.
Sorry, Ms. Hall. Is that saying that 24% of our Caucasian what's that third set, the Caucasian, the white one? We're doing worse than the state there?
No.
No.
The exact opposite. So what we have here in the blue is we have 75, let's see, Pasco's 24% white and 76% other, non-white. So the other is the 75.
It's not who's passing.
No.
This is just our demographic data.
The bar graph at the bottom represents just a demographic
Demographic
comparison between Pasco and the state.
But you can pull that data out and compare it directly with the state, and our graduation rates are consistent. If you compare each demographic, like if you pull out bilingual and compare it with the state's bilingual, our graduation rates are consistently higher than the state's for the same demographic.
So when I read through this packet, I read it incorrectly, that like on the first one, that 74% of our free and reduced cohort was passing versus 43% for the state. I
Right,
read it
where this is
incorrectly.
just a snapshot of these subgroups, our district rate, our district percentage to the state percentage.
That would be actually cooler numbers down there if we did do that. I think it would be
I'll work on
awesome.
that.
Yeah.
If only 36% are bilingual or passing, well, that would be good.
So does that clarify this chart below? Okay. Okay. So in this slide, if we look at the state, which is the top blue line, and the district below it, we're looking at here, let's see, what do we got here? We have our, trying to see what.
Free and reduced.
Free and reduced. So again, if we're looking at the free and reduced, we are showing the same steady growth. And I'd like to say that we're just continuing that trend of having our kids that are of poverty group, achieving. And down below, we have our bilingual population as well as our special ed, which is in the blue. And of course, these are our continued focus, and we will continue to study and improve the graduation rates of these subgroups. Okay. And as I mentioned before, our fifth-year graduation rates have made significant gains, and we are clearly closing the gap between the state and the district. So this is the state, and then this is the district on the fifth-year graduation rate. So again, more of our students are choosing to pursue a fifth year and not drop out. And we believe our strategies and efforts contribute to their sense of hope and having a relationship with the school that they continue to want to continue their education with us. So many factors are in play when analyzing graduation rates. It is difficult to infer a singular root or dominant cause for improvement. However, our high school principals have focused on some key actions, mainly building stronger relationships with every student by the frequent use of data, and these data points being monitored by grade level teams. These teams are made up of counselors, administrators, and student achievement specialists. They review the data weekly to capture struggling students and reach out to the families to identify the right support. And support is available to all students during the day now with Bulldog and Hawk Time advisory, and then extended times in before and after school options, as well as Saturday school and summer school. So, as mentioned earlier, we are in the process of fine-tuning our data dashboard system, which will allow our high school teams to extract data more quickly and improve the speed and the efficiency of monitoring students and connecting them with the right help. The early warning system will include, but not be limited to attendance information, discipline reports, as well as grades. And this, as I mentioned, will help us identify students at risk for on-time graduation so we can intervene immediately and personalize their support. Our goal is to go from numbers to names. We're not just looking at numbers. We know these kids personally, and that we're helping them develop a path, and these teams are helping to facilitate their success. And as we've shared in previous college and career ready reports, we have explained and we have expanded and will continue to enhance our academic interventions within the school day, strategically assign more staff, and partner with community resources to address social and emotional needs, and increase the number of high-interest course options for our students. The combination of these efforts, coupled with our monitoring system that's coming on board, have been fundamental to achieving our current rates of graduation, and we hope will continue to make a difference. So with that.
Speaking to the factors that's causing steady growth, I have to say that I have seen it with my own eyes. I'm really close to one of the SASs at Chiawana, which is I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's Scholastic Achievement Specialist, I believe. And she is the one for the freshmen. And you always see kids coming into her office, miss, you called my mom when I skipped. Why'd you have to do that, Now she calls me every class to see if I'm there. Well, it might not be good for that person at the moment, but it's good for their education overall, So I've seen it, and then our principal, it's like he knows every student by name. It's not anybody that walks by and he'll be like, oh, what's your name? He'll already know it, and that seems to help a lot. So there you go.
We want them to know that we care, and if you go into their offices, they will have boards with pictures of these kids, and you have people who are personally assigned to touch base with those kids on a regular basis and make sure they know that they're loved, and we're helping them through it.
It's kind of funny because I don't even go to your school. Mr. Walwork knows who I am. I just do softball, and he's like, oh, what's up? So it's like.
Thank you. I like where we're going with this to graduate with a career path. If 80% of our students graduate, but only 10% of them are actually doing what they want to do, and we're prepared for that, then we failed. But if we graduate these students and we've actually helped them get them on track to where they want to be, that's the goal. And so I'm excited to kind of see where this leads us in that direction.
And that's my biggest question with this. How are we going to measure how many kids have a career path?
So I think that's in one of our other outrageous outcomes, right? This isn't,
Except this is the graduate and have a career path.
oh, that's on the same
It is on
line,
the
isn't it?
same line. I think at your insistence too, if I remember correctly.
I had a couple of insistences. I don't remember that one specifically, but.
No, I think that's a good, one thing that we've talked about is, I really think that every student needs this. And then we have this high school and beyond plan. It's just a matter of like, how emphasized is it? Do our students all have one? I mean, we have 3 students right here. Do you have a plan?
Do you have a high school and
Do
beyond?
you meet with someone? Did you meet with someone in 8th grade or 7th grade or 9th grade? And, that's how we're going to get there, that, there has to be a plan in place that every student, not just the priority students or the students that are identified as high risk, but that every student has a meeting, preferably, I think, with a parent, a counselor, the student. How can we help you reach your dreams and your goals? And to me, that has to happen for every student.
I think Delta, and maybe you can speak to this, Delta, actually, when their students are going out, they have lots of surveys and they ask you guys a lot, what's your career path? So they have good data on that, and maybe that's best practices that can be implemented at the other schools. Go ahead, sorry.
We do focus a lot on high school and beyond, but one thing is it's not really emphasized until your junior year, but it's great that it is because we have internships that are heavily emphasized, and we have like fairs in our cafeteria to try to get internships, and we set goals on like 50% of the students to have an internship and increasing that year by year. And then in advisory, we do focus on career plans, and when we have our student-led conferences, we have to provide a career plan. My advisor says you're not allowed to pass my class unless you have a plan for what you're going to do after. And we also have a required course that I took at the start of the year that we went and we talked to different career people, and we toured a lot of different career fairs, and we even went to one at Chiawana, and that one was really good. So we do emphasize it a lot, but it's not like focused until junior year as much.
Speaking for Chiawana, and this is just my personal opinion, and even though we have some of the best counselors, I believe, that are out there, our high school and beyond plan at the moment and steps forward and towards it is slightly lacking. It was treated as freshmen, a requirement for graduating, and that's all it's been, really. You turn it in, you write what you want to do, and you turn it in, and after you turn it in, you don't think about it again, and it hasn't been brought up too many times except now for advisory, but it hasn't been enforced. It's not directed. Oh, I saw your high school and beyond plan, and this is what you wanted to do, and this is the things you can do towards it. So at the moment, it's not really enforced to the best of its ability, but I know that it can be, so.
Well, I think this is a wonderful area that we could actually get 100%. I mean, I think it's going to be really hard to get 100% in this, but this is one that we could really do it. We could do it within a matter of a couple of years. But I would love to know what the steps are to determine what that means for kids to have a career path. And I do want it to be something physical, that I don't know. And so I'd love to see what they would come together and do. And I would also like to hope to see that it's consistent across our 3 high schools. We don't have control over Delta, but that, it looks like X, Y, and Z. What I've learned in life is when you have a plan, it's easier to do whatever you want. You may not stick with that plan, but it enables you to get to maybe something that is better because you have a plan. And if you don't, it's like, what are we gonna do? Let's go, get the easiest job that you can that isn't what our kids need to be able to support themselves and a family later on.
Kristana mentioned advisory, which is something that is really, I think Pasco High's had it over time. It's become a renewed focus. It's new at Chiawana this year, but it's become a renewed focus recently. And I've mentioned to the board in the past that it might be worth us looking at a study session, bringing some high school teachers in who are familiar with what they're doing in advisory to talk about where we're currently at, which again is kind of in that infancy stage of either renewing it at Pasco High or implementing at Chiawana, but to just get a clear picture of what our plan is currently and then what's the 3 to 5 year plan in terms of implementation and making that real and relevant for kids. So that might be something worth getting on the agenda should the board officers request it during agenda setting. We'd be happy to do that.
I know our advisors are super cool, especially my advisor, Miss Tate, and she puts a lot of emphasis on the students and like really asks them questions and talks to them. And if they don't have a plan, she helps them figure it out. And she's really a good person to talk to, and I know the other advisors are too.
So when I was at Delta the other day, I was asking Ms. Rodriguez, I said, so we're going to possibly most likely go to trimesters across the district. You know, what are the best practices that contribute towards graduation success? And one of the first things out of her mouth was the advisory time. And we've been talking about advisory time, and stuff like this is part of bargaining, or it has been the last couple years anyway. So I tied together that I would request that if we do go to trimesters, I think it would behoove us to talk to Ms. Rodriguez and other people so that the board and the district knows what is Delta doing with, they have extra time, they have trimesters, what do they do that they think are best practices that should be implemented into a trimester day so that we can bargain those if required. I'm just looking at the slide here and it says stuff like hawk time and bulldog time. These are important things to get, so we're coming up on a bargain, and if we know best practices from Delta, I think we as a board should talk about that and discuss that.
Yeah, I agree with all that's been said. I know it's getting late and I'd like to make it home before my kids go to bed, but this is so crucial to our youth and their future. And I, you know, we're just throwing out ideas, but I really think in 8th grade, like they have an enhanced, I have a 7th grader, he's my oldest, but in 8th grade during enhancement or something, there should be some meeting with each student individually to kind of talk about what are your plans for 9th grade and beyond. And then with this advisor, however, you guys will know way more about this and what the best practice is, but something in high school where that's followed up on, and if it needs to be modified, you know, through this, it seems like the transition we're in right now is really providing us the perfect opportunity to just really take a step up in what we're providing for our students, and I'm just super excited. But maybe that's a way, you know, I'm going to have an 8th grader next year. I really want to see how it pans out. Is this something that we can implement so that during 8th grade, they have a meeting, they're required to have their parents sign it. We get things all the time that we have to sign from our students. Review this with your parent. We're going to have a meeting with a counselor. What are your plans? What are your interests? You know, get that ball rolling.
I know it's just one more thing to add to your list, but I think this is critical. It's going to take time. This is a cultural change, not just, I'm sure it's not just Pasco, but it's youth in particular. Just, they get to high school, they graduate, and now what? I think we've got to start younger, helping them identify that this is, you need to pick something and get going there. So appreciate your work in this. Thank you for your presentation. I'm assuming the board is done, because I think all of us, like Dr. Richardson, would like to get home. Is there any, so thank you, Mrs. Hall. Any comments from anybody in the audience that wants to give any input to the board? All right, doesn't look like there's much energy on that, so thank you. And we will move on to, so there's no action items tonight. Consent agenda, number 12. Personnel warrants, overnight student travel, Chiawana speech and debate competition. I have a motion on the consent agenda.
Mr. President, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Mr. President, I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Could we get a roll call on the consent agenda? Yes.
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 Thank you. So future agenda items.
So on the 23rd, we are going to continue our deep study of the facilities usage policy. Sarah Thornton will help us with that during a study session. We'll also have a school report during that time. We have a number of reports that we'll be providing. We're going to be doing the second of the series around the interface between the ESSA accountability and the outrageous outcomes. We'll have a data bite to be determined in terms of content. And we may be asking to push that nutrition services update. So for sure you'll have the ESSA accountability and outrageous outcomes in a data bite.
Sounds good, thank you. And we will not have an executive session, so with that, Our meeting is adjourned. Just to make sure the clock, 8:39. It's official.